Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. Welcome back to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. Thanks so much for listening along to this special series revolving around drug development. Specifically, a lot of it has to do with drug development in the rare disease space. We're having a lot of fun hearing from these experts.
Today, we're touching on the preclinical stage, some of the activities that take place in the lab mostly, and a few decisions discussed before a company moves into clinical trials, which, of course, is where the patient gets involved.
Kristina Bowyer is the VP of Patient-Centric Drug Development at Ionis Pharmaceuticals, and she joins us today for this conversation.
Kristina, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean and Kyle. Thanks so much for having me.
Before we get too far, I do want to give a shout out to our friend. We have a mutual friend. That's how we got connected. He's also a listener, and we've had him on the show. James Valentine, thank you for helping us connect with Kristina today. To kick off the conversation with you, Kristina, we'd love to hear your top 5 lists, and all we've asked of you is that you put one together, right? So what is the category of your top 5 today?
I just put together my top 5 favorite things.
Okay.
All right. I like it.
So it was really hard kind of coming up with the topic. So I just stuck with things that I love the most. And my number 1 is my family. I'm lucky enough to have married my high school sweetheart. I have 3 wonderful kids, 3 crazy dogs. And wow. I realize every day how blessed I am, and they keep me very grounded, but also support my passion for helping people.
That you have a lot going on. 3 kids and 3 dogs. That's intense.
Hence the noise canceling headphones that I'm always wearing.
Yes. Love that. And notice, listeners, she said noise counseling, not canceling. That was on purpose.
It's like selective hearing or something, right?
Yeah, right.
Right.
All right, so after family, what do you have?
I have to say food. We are huge foodies. I've listened to some of your podcasts about the different restaurants and best places to eat and snack time during Zoom burnout. I'm like, I can relate to everything in there. But everything I think about food, loving to cook, feeding people, and my favorite food is actually tacos. So like on my worst day, a good taco makes everything better.
Nice.
So, Kristina, you love to cook. Can you give me your address? Because might invite myself over for dinner sometime.
No kidding.
Absolutely. I ship stuff out too.
Nice.
Sign me up.
Do you have your go-to taco place? For our listeners, you're in San Diego, right?
Yeah.
Which means there's some great spots. So do you have your go-to?
There's a place there's a Hiliberto's next door that makes like the best crunchy beef taco.
Nice.
It depends on the type of taco and the type of mood and what kind of food reinforcement you need.
All right, fair enough.
So I'll move to my number 3, which I put down as being kind, because I view kindness as kind of like a sport. It's one of those things that's one of my favorite things is just kind of like, what you wish somebody would do for you in that moment. And so kind of just like randomly throwing stuff out there and being thoughtful about people and just inputting when people least expect it, in an attempt to just really be kind and thoughtful about what other people are going through. So
I like that it's written down on your list, because that just makes it conscious, right? It's a conscious effort to be kind. Like, that seems so simple, but if we make that effort, it's that much better.
It really is. I mean, I think we've all been like that shy person or that uncomfortable person that walks into a room and you're like, oh no, I don't know anybody here. Who am I going to talk to?
I want
And
to
then
leave
somebody
and
just,
get a taco
right?
and just eat by myself.
Or wear your favorite t-shirt that says, I love tacos so
Yes.
much.
Yeah.
My fourth thing I have to say is smiling, because I think it never ceases to amaze me how contagious smiling can be. And so smiling at strangers or like making eye contact and getting people to smile always I just love doing that. Like it's so funny because even if somebody has like a total grumpy still skin face and they still crack a smile at you, it's just amazing. I think that you can just kind of like change somebody's attitude just with yours.
How do you handle that right now when everybody's in a mask?
Right. That's the biggest challenge. I'm always laughing. I'm like, can you see my eyes are smiling? Can you tell that my eyes are smiling? I have one mask that has a little smile on it. So I try
There
to
you
wear
go.
that one often too. But
Nice.
I figure I try to talk with my eyes.
There you go.
There
Yeah.
you go.
And then my last thing, I love what I do. Like I have this privilege of being able to be part of something that's so much bigger than just me. And so being able to, have a job where I actually, get to do what I love and know that that one person can make a difference in the world. And the way that you engage with people is how you do that. It's based on the relationships and what you do with your knowledge, and the interactions that you have with people. I think that to me is the one of the best things. I couldn't ask for something that's more important, honestly, than loving what you do.
It makes the world of difference, right? Most of us have to work, have to spend our life doing something, whether that's in an occupation or raising the family or taking care of a loved one. There are things we have to do. And if we dread every day we have to do it, that's going to make life really sad and hard and almost depressing. So I love the fact that you mentioned loving what you do. And really, that's the reason why you're on the show today, in a sense. Our drug development series is full of people like you, Kristina, that are incredibly thankful for what they do, and they pursue their work with excellence in mind. And no doubt that's what you're doing with the work that you do. Would you mind tell us a little bit about you and that career journey, that work you do?
Sure. I have been at Ionis now this is my 29th year.
Wow.
My entire adult career has been there. I started off in the lab doing research, with this idea of moving to clinical development because I really wanted to work with patients. And so I went back to school while I was working full time, got my nursing license so that I could move to clinical development. And my drug discovery program kind of superseded me, and it was moving faster than I could. And I ended up, kind of shifting gears into corporate communications and spending time talking about the research that I was doing. So at the time, I was part of the cardiovascular program. Our lead compound was moving forward for familial hypercholesteremia. And, I ended up talking about, the technology and the experiments that I was doing in the lab for the next few years of my life, which was really fun, honestly. It was always interesting to hear that it was amazing that I knew the science too from the investor perspective at times. It made it entertaining. And, I think from there, my whole purpose has really been on making patients better, like doing something to make sure that I was going to influence like disease and progress towards making better medicines. And I love interacting with patients. And it turned out that, about 10 years ago, I was able to, start Ionis's first patient advocacy program.
Wow.
not really knowing, what we were how I was going to be focused, how that was going to work, where to start. So we really started with a lot of grassroots efforts, working with just different disease communities, trying to figure out where were the most impactful points in drug development that we could be working with patient groups, and hence, our common friend James Valentine, early on, you figured out that, disease awareness and educating regulators on patient communities and what patients are going through is critical to drug development. And so really that was one of the early focuses of the program. And then from there, it's every aspect of drug development, right? I mean, you have to start with the end in mind. It's not just approval, right? It's access to that drug as well. And so there's this continuum in working with patient communities.
Was there a specific point in Ionis's development and progression where it became clear that you guys needed to start going after patient engagement more specifically and with a specific effort and position like yours?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of instances that I remember. One of the first programs that we were focused on was just it was before Spinraza was approved, right? And so we were working in SMA, and it's one of the points about rare disease, right? No two patients look the same, and so working hard to try to show that a benefit for a patient with SMA was a benefit that translated to every patient with SMA, regardless of the type. And so, not focusing on whether it was type 1 and it was infants, or type 2 or type 3, and those people were still able to walk. It was what was the common thread that was a benefit that no matter what stage or type of SMA patient you were, showed that it was a life-changing benefit for the entire community. And I think that was really kind of what opened my eyes to, what we want, what we're looking for in labels down the line. We don't want it to be restricted and narrowed. And the other component of it, I think, is from understanding that there's value in everybody's benefit, right? It's not just if the benefit helps you breathe. So for SMA, it was a great example because it was any incremental improvement in strength really translated into a life-changing benefit for everybody. If you were an infant with type 1, it gave you the strength to breathe. If you were a child with type 2, it gave you strength so that you could manage your wheelchair or feed yourself or carry your books. And if you were, a little bit older with type 3, it could actually help you maintain your ability to continue walking independently and keep you out of a wheelchair. And so I think the work that you do, it made me realize how important it is to really understand the disease from the patient perspective. And I think there's so much unknown with rare disease that, we grasp on to what we do know. And so, acromegaly is a great example, right? It's certain biochemical levels that you're looking for normalization, but yet when you look from the patient perspective, those levels and those biochemical levels could be normal, but the patient still doesn't feel right. They still have all of these other issues. And so how do you capture that kind of information? And how do you account for it? How do you measure it?
You mentioned in the lab, that's what we want to talk to you about is, translating from the lab to the clinic. First of all, what are some of the deciding factors when it comes to deciding whether a therapy is going to be a pill or an injection or an infusion? Or I know that happens in the lab, and how do you decide that and go down that road?
Sure. It's really the genetic basis of the disease that you need to understand. What's the root cause of the disease? Is it a mutation? What's the target gene involved specifically, so that you can take that information and translate that into the drug that defines, what type of drug you're going to design. Is it a small molecule drug that will work for a disease, a monoclonal antibody, an antisense drug, or even gene therapy? I think it's the underlying basis of what's causing the disease is the first step.
I appreciate you hearing that, because there are times, I'm not I have a very unscientific mind. And when I'm told to swallow a big old horse pill, I just think, who are the jerks behind this idea? Like, who said it's got to be this way? And of course, that's just kind of silly. But understanding that the type and style and the method has more to do with the genetic makeup of the condition or the issue than it does somebody's desire to make the pill big or small or liquid or whatever it may be.
But also, Sean, in the case of Bill Horse Pill, like if the company came to you and said, you know what, Sean, would it be better if we put this in 2 pills? Would that be easier for you? Because then the patient is giving feedback on what they would prefer, and that's something that is possible and might contribute to more compliance in taking the medicine.
Yeah, patient preference is something that's very important, I think. And, it's getting more recognized, the need to do research around patient preference. But I agree, you need to have input on the person who's actually going to be taking that therapy. What are the issues? And even in the, especially even before you get to that in the clinical trial process, right? Is this something that you can do? Is this feasible? Are we asking of you something that you're capable of?
Is there a specific point when you go, okay, this is ready for clinical stage? This is ready to go into people. You check those boxes, and how does that decision get made?
I mean, there's a lot of safety studies, a lot of screening that happens. So once you know something's amenable, we screen thousands and thousands of oligos trying to find the right one, right? It's like, what street the gene lives on now, and now you need to find the exact house number, which is the perfect house for this gene for us to target, to make sure that we're going to have the most active compound. And then from there, it's making sure that not only is it active in vitro and in vivo, but then making sure that it's safe, right? And so safety is another component. So understanding that, you're engaging with the target that you are specifically intending to engage with, showing that there are not off-target effects, showing that in animals there is potentially even disease phenotype that can be reversed with the drug treatment. And then moving forward from there, I think those are all like check boxes, right? You want to make sure you have the right in vitro models, the right in vivo models, and that, you've found the most active compound and it's safe and you're ready to move forward.
So I think it might be helpful. Like when you say oligo, that's, first of all, that's a funny word. But what does that mean? And I understand that Ionis is sort of in the business of making really great oligos, right? What is that?
I should be saying antisense medicines or antisense drugs. So antisense drugs are just small synthetic RNA pieces. They're made up of nucleotides. They're short little, 20 base nucleotides that are chemically modified to target a specific RNA in a specific tissue, and kind of get ahead of the disease, right? And so historically, you have small molecules that target proteins or antibodies that target antigens and have the immune system take over. Antisense works a little bit before that because it's targeting the RNA that gets translated into a disease-causing protein. And so you're affecting it a little bit earlier on.
I'm going to be honest here, guys. You both lost me at tacos. Okay, I have not been able to focus since that point.
Man, that's really hopeful. I appreciate your honesty, though.
All jokes or reality aside, Kristina, one of the things we talked about prior to today is the approach Ionis takes on involving patients early on in the development of a particular drug or therapy. And we know that, generally speaking, a lot of companies are great at doing that and are doing it. some companies are not. And that's really kind of a traditional model of waiting till, way down the road. As the vice president of patient-centric drug development with Ionis, what is your philosophy on engaging the patient early on?
It could never be too early. When you're looking to understand a rare disease, the scientific inclination is right is to go to the researchers and to go to the physicians. Don't forget to go to the patients, right? Because they're the actual expert in the disease. And no matter what you're reading, it's still not the same as hearing it firsthand and really understanding that experience. And so we've put a lot of focus on capturing patient experience data, understanding, what are the most bothersome symptoms of patients, what you're seeking in a potential therapy, what does an improved quality of life look like to you? And empowering patient groups not only to share that information with us, but help them with our knowledge base. And how do we empower patient groups and help them grow to support their communities better, to help them realize opportunities that are out there to educate regulators on the burden of disease and things like that. And so from my perspective, I think you could never really start early enough. And I think, historically it's an investment based decision, but when you really take the most realistic view of it, or the most simplistic view, it's a relationship, right? And it's built on trust and transparency. It's not a cost. It's a commitment of time and of interest, right? And it's really, it doesn't have to be so complicated.
Do you have an example of how feedback from a patient helped shape their direction or the outcome of a drug?
I remember being at a meeting for myotonic dystrophy, and we had a program that we still have ongoing that's actually moving along nicely now. I remember one of the primary endpoints was myotonia. So it was like a grip strength kind of test that went along with it. And I remember sitting at a meeting where, there were regulatory agency representatives that specifically called out, like, he understood grip strength, but how was that clinically meaningful to a patient? How is that going to impact the patient's life? What does it make better for the patient? And so I think, focusing on making sure that everything that we do is clinically meaningful, and really understanding what clinically meaningful means, right?
Yeah, we have a pegboard test in our clinic, and I'm sure you do too in lots of your diseases. And one feedback from the FDA is, well, no one does just sits at home and does a pegboard. Yeah, but you know what? That, for me, that translates into being able to button my shirt.
Yep.
Or manipulate a pill out of the bottle to get it in my mouth, or a multitude of other things, right?
Putting the key in the door. Like, that's hard sometimes,
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is, right?
Yeah.
And so, relating those things to everyday actions is the important thing.
Absolutely. And that's the key to what we're trying to do by capturing patient experience data, right? Make sure that we're not just using a 9-hole peg test, right, to capture that, but showing that what we are measuring means that you are able to, complete ADLs, you're able to button shirts, do keys, do all of the things that you need to do with those fine motor skills. And maybe there's, opportunity to capture, it in a better way. Over time, I think working with the patient communities, you're able to identify, alternative avenues even to measure things. I mean, we work in the Angelman space, and one of the things that we're working on is a home-based video assessment that's task-based, right? Because we know that we ask children to come to clinics all the time and perform all these tests. Well, I have kids, and they don't always listen, and they have bad days, and they get tired. Yeah. And so you think about, if you had a home-based video assessment that you could do off of your phone, You have a scripted task list that your kids know how to do. You're just videotaping them to see how well they're doing something. And over time, in an environment that's comfortable for them, you could actually show a benefit.
Once a company like yours has kind of figured out which way they're going and how they're going to design a clinical trial, I want to talk a little bit about the safety side of it. We know that no matter what we're talking about, what condition or what therapy, there's always a risk, right? To some degree. So I'm curious how you or how a company might classify acceptable risk. Like, how do you define what's okay and what's not? Or if you want to get specific, how do you define adverse? Like, and what level of adverse incidents are okay, and which ones are maybe show-stopping, if you will?
Safety is the most critical component. You want to make sure that a compound is safe. And there's levels, right? So there's adverse reactions. So I take a migraine medicine that I have to give myself a shot. Sometimes the shot burns, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it leaves a red mark. That's a mild, adverse reaction. But then you have, other drugs that have other levels of reaction. So like when you think about blood thinners, right? You need to understand the risk of bleeding that you're putting patients at. I think for us, we're looking at, is the drug stopping disease progression? That's really important. And as a result of that disease progression, are there any off-target or toxic effects that are happening? And that's really what you're looking for. You think about, stopping disease progression could be great, but if you maybe stop it too much, that there's other diseases that you could pivot a person to. So I think within rare disease, there's a lot of complicated layers. Again, it goes back to how clearly defined the underlying biological mechanism is, right? If you know that what the target affects, you can test that, you can show that it is having the effects that you are, not only that you're seeking, but that you're expecting.
I think part of Sean's question was, how do we define adverse? And specifically in rare disease, when, like, for example, in Friedreich's ataxia, there is no treatment or cure, just like a lot of other diseases. When there's no treatment option, the risk tolerance from a patient perspective is much higher. So how do you figure out what the tolerance for the patient is, what the tolerance for the FDA is? Because those things certainly might not be the same. And then, you've got to translate that into what the risk tolerance is for Ionis, and then figure out, what satisfies all of those parties. How do you do that?
We have to show that there's a disease modifying benefit, and then we can look at what are the side effects from that point. If there's a disease modifying benefit, there's a benefit risk framework that gets developed on, what's acceptable, what the need is, and what the data is. And there's a way of putting all of that together. It stems off of the work that you do with patient groups and understanding what are the challenges, what are the benefits that are sought, what are the aspects of health that are important to move the needle on.
One of the things that I think about is, like, for example, one of the side effects of a drug might be nausea. And somebody with Friedreich's ataxia might think, I could take a little nausea if it's going to help me get a fork to my mouth so I can eat, or, if it helps me button my shirt or whatever like that. But in a different condition, some nausea might not be acceptable, and so you kind of got to fit the risk benefit profile to each different disease and community, right?
How much is the FDA involved, and at what point do they get really involved, I guess? Because I would assume we know the process is 10 plus years, and I'm pretty sure the FDA isn't calling in once a week to see how you're doing. So how much are they involved at this stage of development?
Sure. I think that the rare disease program creates an environment to support and accelerate drug development, especially in the case of rare diseases. There are different avenues and opportunities to reach out and get input. I think historically, companies are sometimes hesitant. They don't want to ask a stupid question, and then you also don't want to ask too soon. And so to me, it's also a great opportunity for the patient community to work with regulators, right? There's listening sessions that you can do. There's patient-focused drug development meetings to help define what that need is and bring to light what the questions are about the disease, right? Are the most bothersome symptoms known? Are there endpoints already developed to define, clinically meaningful benefits to patients in a specific disease? And so I think what's a great opportunity in the rare disease space is just the multiple opportunities there are for patient groups to educate on their disease. And there's been so much of the evolution to date has been really great, right? You're seeing some patient groups that have really they're changing kind of what advocacy is all about, right? And creating opportunities. The one thing that we don't do enough of is leveraging learnings from one disease to the next, right? Because when we think about it in the grand scheme of things, there's 7,000 rare diseases. There's no way that we are all going to know everything about every one of them. But what we can do is identify learnings from one disease and make sure that we translate that to the next disease that we're looking at. And so I think that is another key area. And I think, with all of the different community meetings that are happening with regulators, with all of the patient-focused drug development meetings that have happened, there are a lot of learnings that are still out there to be translated to the next disease indication. So
when we kicked this drug development series off, we had a guest. Her name was Barbara, and in her episode, she talked about this exact deficit or problem, if you will, where we don't share enough information. So given your position and some of the work you do and having the same philosophy of needing to share and leverage learnings, as you say, do you have any idea how to do that? Like where would a company or where would we begin to make sure that what you learned somehow translates to another company or another advocacy group?
Right. So I think being transparent and publishing is really important, making sure that all of the data that we are capturing is being put out into the public domain, that patient registries or natural history is being collected to make that accessible to everybody. I love to work with advocacy organizations and in industry consortiums, right? Make everybody who's at the table, all the pharma representatives, come to your roundtable discussions and work together. It's very valuable, and it's becoming more common practice now. I think earlier everybody was used to working in their silos, and I think now there's so much opportunity for companies to work together. We collaborate with multiple different companies in different disease areas because in the end it's for the patient's benefit, right? And making sure that the data you're collected isn't locked away and it isn't inaccessible, and patients have the right to their data. So the patient community should own that natural history data. They should own their registry data. They should have access to share it with other researchers and make that readily available. Because in the end, we're looking to create a disease modifying therapy, but that's not exactly a cure yet, right? And so until we get to that, there's always going to be iterations of drug development that's going to happen to continue to make advancements for each disease that we target.
So our next episode is diving deep into the clinical stage of drug development. From your experience, how does a board of directors or, how do you communicate to investors that Ionis is ready to go to the clinical stage or a company is ready to move this asset along to the clinical stage?
I think you show that that you're developing a life-changing therapy. I mean, you show in the preclinical data that there's disease modification in the animal models that you have put together, and that and that, you're taking forward something that is potentially a life-changing drug, that you're engaging with the target that of interest, and that there is a therapeutic benefit associated with that, and that the appropriate biomarkers are either reducing or increasing or appropriately showing target engagement. I think all of those things are a combination of just of showing that you've clearly picked the right target, you're engaging with that target. The next step is just to make sure that that animal research translates into patients. Ultimately, we're trying to make a clinically impactful drug and make patients' lives better. And I think there's just a human element that just needs to be, kind of ingrained throughout the development process.
I love hearing that, and I appreciate hearing that, because it just affirms in me the commitment to the finish line that I know Ionis and so many other companies that we have the privilege of being connected to also share. That they're dedicated to making life better. Sure, they've got a business to sustain, and they've got bills to pay, but at the end of the day, they're trying to make life better, and I love the way you've just kind of wrapped it all up with that little bow, and it just gives me confidence in the companies that have dedicated themselves to rare and orphan drug development. So thank you for sharing your perspective and a little bit about your company's work. I really value the conversation today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I can't tell you this. It was actually really fun, and I really enjoyed being able to have the conversation. I value, all your perspective and just the questions and driving conversation. So thank you. Thanks for trusting me.
Thank you, Kristina. $29? I thought she was joking at first.
Right.
Does she even look old enough to have been working for 30 years?
No. She doesn't look old enough to have 3 kids,
right.
Old enough to be in her career for 30, none of it.
Exactly.
Like, I'm impressed. But, Kyle, there's something to be said for such longevity, and it's obvious that she is committed to not just her role, but enjoying out the patient perspective as much as she can.
Yeah, and to be able to bring the very technical aspect and the human aspect together and put it into action, that's truly something special.
Yeah, I love that she talks about coming from the lab. She knows all sides of the coin, so to speak, so I really value her perspective. Thank you, Kristina, for your time and your willingness to dive into this topic with Kyle and I.
So, Sean, let's close this out with some gratitude. My thank you note for today goes out to the painter that is painting my house. And so you know that I'm getting some work done on the inside of my house, and they're just finishing.
All you ever talk about.
They're just finishing up, and so the painter is in. There was a little defect in the door to my bathroom, and the painter stuck around for like 2 hours to try and fix it. I think it looks a lot better. It's not quite there, so we still have a little work to do, but I really appreciate that he was like, all right, let's figure this out instead of just walking away when he could have.
Yeah, it's cool. It's huge that somebody is committed to doing what they can to find a solution.
Right.
Question real quick. You live alone. Do you close the bathroom door?
I usually don't, and that's what happened, is that I knew the construction guys were coming. So I closed the bathroom door, and it got super foggy in there when I was taking a shower, and I didn't realize that the door was basically wet, and it's a pocket door, so it got wet, and then I slid it into the wall, right? And so it just kind of, it warped inside the wall because it was wet. So that's kind of what happened. And so he was trying to fix that damage.
I see. All right. Well, thank you. My thank you is kind of broad. In a sense, I'm digging the Enneagram. A lot of our listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with this. I don't know if you call it a philosophy or a sort of study of the human psyche. It's basically a personality type. The Enneagram is a lot of fun for me right now. I'm reading a book called Road Back to You, which is a look at the Enneagram from a fairly spiritual perspective. So I'm just having a blast learning and discovering how things work and how we tick. And I found it to be helpful in even regulating my own expression of frustration or anger or things like that. So I'm having a blast learning.
Love that.
One of these days, when I get through more, I'm gonna guess at what your personality Enneagram number is, and I would encourage our guests to take a shot at it too if they know the Enneagram.
How do you just go online and like fill something out and it gives you a number or something?
Yeah, so there's a 15-minute or so test, personality test questionnaire you can fill out, and it'll give you your number based on your responses. But I want to read all the types and then guess at what I think you are.
All right, that sounds good.
So
You're
that's
on.
the plan. Well, we're already running long, so thank you for listening today. Please keep sharing with your friends. Subscribe to this show on your favorite podcast app. We're going to bring you another expert next week on the clinical stage of drug development. We hope you're enjoying this series. We're having a blast sharing it with you. Stay tuned for more next week, and in the meantime,
keep living with urgency. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This show is possible with your support. Visit twodisableddudes.com to donate.
Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.